we are being recorded. So now anything crazy you say will be on the record for posterity. More likely, anything crazy I say will be on the record for posterity. How about you, Neil Lamb?
Hello, Josh. How are you?
I'm good. Been a while.
It has been. It's good to see you.
Good to be seen. All right. Here, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so it's 10:01. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've got my PowerPoint shared. Can y'all see that? Give me a thumbs up if you see the PowerPoint. Okay, cool. All right, I want to be respectful of your time this morning, so I'm going to go as quickly as possible and explain to you why I have called on you for some help. And that is exactly what this is. I'm asking for a favor from some friends to help us make sure that we can continue to do the job that we were set up to do in the way that we were set up to do it. So the situation at hand calls first for a disclaimer. These are the opinions of the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship. By you being on this call does not necessarily mean that you agree with these opinions, and it doesn't mean that these are the opinions of the entire state of Alabama. These are the opinions of my office exclusively. We're recording this and going to share it out, but we're asking for everybody to take your own look. I'm going to show you some items that are concerning to us, and you can react to those, but you're encouraged to review the entire NPRM on your own and make your own assessments of whether you think this would be good, bad, or otherwise if you need to make a comment on those things. So with that out of the way, here's the situation. We have a rulemaking process going on right now. So for a quick overview, the way this rulemaking process works, Congress passes laws. In this case, it's the 1937 Fitzgerald Act that created registered apprenticeship in the U.S. That act is only a few pages long and has been in place and working fine since 1937. Several years, I guess about 2 years ago, the Department of Labor and some members of Congress decided it was time to update that Fitzgerald Act. They put in what many people viewed as some very significant changes that were largely pro-labor changes at that time, just because of the administration that was in the White House, and those changes were pretty soundly rejected through the legislative process. So virtually none of that stuff got done. That National Apprenticeship Act reauthorization was dead in the water. It really never got any traction. As a result of that, the U.S. Department of Labor now, under Acting Secretary Sue, acting because she can't get appointed because the Senate won't confirm her, Acting Secretary Julie Sue has put forward a rulemaking process. And the way this rulemaking process works, and I know many of you know this, so it may be remedial, but it allows the executive agency, whether it's Department of Labor or whatever in the federal agency, to create the rules that interpret and implement the law that was put in place by Congress. So this fills in all of the details around how the thing works that Congress authorized through the legislation. So this rulemaking process kind of outlined right here starts over here in the purple. The Congress passed the law, 1937. Agency drafts a set of internally proposed rules. We are operating under a set of rules that were updated in 2008. Those federal rules are called the Code of Federal Regulations, and those were the rules under which my office was established. Those are the new rules are proposed. They have been reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget. The agency publishes a notice of proposed rulemaking, so you'll hear us say the NPRM over and over again. This is the notice of proposed rulemaking, and then the public is given the opportunity to review those rules. So that's where we are right now. We're within a 60-day comment period right here for public review of those notice of proposed rules. Now, once that comment period is over, the agency is obligated to review all of the public comments and respond. Now, they don't have to respond to everyone individually, but if there are 50 comments that say we're concerned about this thing, or we don't think that should happen, or whatever, they have to respond to that group. They can group them together and say, we heard a lot of comments about this, so here's the response. They are not obligated, it's not a vote. They're not obligated to take any action really based on the responses. They have to consider the responses, and that's about it. And then once they have considered those responses, they've made their public responses clear, then if there are significant changes to what they originally proposed, Office of Management and Budget reviews it again, and then the agency publishes the rule. From there, once the rule goes into effect, it has the force of law. It's the Code of Federal Regulations, so it has the same force as the law that authorized the agency to create it. Two things can happen, or three things can happen there. One, if there's enough public outcry, then Congress can review the rule and find, hey, this is not right, we don't like it. It takes a joint resolution from the House and Senate to stop it through that congressional path, and just, I don't think we could get a joint resolution right now on what color grass is. So that one's probably not happening. Or somebody could sue and file a challenge in federal court to either the whole rule or some portions of the rule. And if the court, finds in favor of whoever's bringing that suit, then they could vacate all or part of the rule, or they could, lose that court case and then the rule takes effect. Or if neither of those things happen, then the rule just goes into effect. So that's kind of the timeline of what we're looking at. Again, we're right now in this red part here where we're giving public comment. So realistically, some version of these rules is most likely going to take effect. Now, just a little side note about other activity that's going on. There's a court case in the Supreme Court right now. There's actually two, but there's one that's famously out right now, and it's about fishermen, herring fishermen in the northeast. And there was a rule like this put out by a federal agency that governs herring fishers. I don't know, whatever the name of the agency was. And that agency interpreted the law to say that the fishermen had to pay a monitor to ride on their boat at about $700 a day to make sure that they were complying with the limits on catching these fish. And those fishermen have brought a lawsuit saying that's not what the law said, and the agency is now creating new additional law. So you've got an executive branch that's acting as a legislative branch. And this goes back about 40 years. It's called the Chevron Doctrine, if anybody wants to nerd out and go look it up. But that's the way it is right now, is that executive agencies are able to essentially create legislation through this rulemaking process. So the court case is to determine whether that is constitutional or not. And just be frank, Josh is pulling for the herring fishermen in this situation. But that's where we are. So that's kind of the broad picture. And then I want to get specific. All right. So what are these particular rules that were put out? These are the rules that govern how federally registered apprenticeship programs operate and how they get run. Now, you all know that my office was created in 2019, and we took over management from the U.S. Department of Labor to manage registered apprenticeships in March of 2020. And we did that because for 82 years, they had done an absolutely terrible job of running registered apprenticeship in the state of Alabama. We've made more progress in our small, short period of existence than they did in 80 plus years when they had it on their own. There are now, once we became a state apprenticeship agency, there are now 32 state apprenticeship agencies. So we were the first ones in 25 years to set up an agency like ours. As soon as we did, Tennessee came right behind us and copied what we did. I mean, literally copied what we did and became a state apprenticeship agency. State of Colorado did. Arkansas has got legislation in play to do it. Iowa has already submitted their application and been turned down once, which was odd because they submitted the same application that everybody else did and got arbitrarily turned down. But the tide has shifted towards having agencies like ours, because having state approved agencies brings that ownership of apprenticeship home to the state, gives us flexibility, gives us options to customize and meet the needs of our employers and our local industry in a way that a one-size-fits-all federal arrangement could never do. So these new rules are 779 pages. The current rules are about, 20 or 30 pages. There's a 779-page proposal of new rules, and they are proposed to take effect. This is the timeline. So this is the first item of concern that we've identified. Let's say that it goes right through, everything gets done the way that it is in the current NPRM. They would take effect December 31 of 2026. There's a plan that I'll talk about in a minute that has to be submitted by September of 2026 for our state to maintain the agency that we currently have. Well, so our first objection right out of the gate is that's an unreasonable timeline, because as you all know, our legislative session started yesterday. So there are things that are in our state law that we would have to update and change to meet if these new proposed rules go through the way that they are set up right now. We would have one legislative session to do that. Now, that's unreasonable. And in our case, we don't have very many laws, and the changes would not be huge to our state law because they're fresh. We just did this in 2019. So we have a good set of laws on the books, but there's some things we'd have to tweak. We have one legislative session to do that. In other states who have been operating apprenticeships since forever at a state agency, they have myriad state laws that would have to be changed, and they would be given one legislative session to do it. If you don't get it done, then your state apprenticeship agency can't be approved, and boom, you just lost your state apprenticeship agency in one fell swoop. So from a state apprenticeship agency timeline, we object to that because we say that's unreasonable to give me one session to get whatever changes done. And I don't even know what the changes are yet, and I wouldn't know until the NPRM was finalized. So they might not put the new rules out, the actual final rules out, for months and months and months. It could be 12 months from now when the rules actually get released. And what if that's the first day of our session and we have to do it right then or lose our time? The second part of the timeline that's problematic is that the programs that we have been recognizing already would have 2 years to come into compliance with these new rules. Now, that sounds like a long time until I show you what some of the things are that they would have to come into compliance with. That's not a long time. And then the third part is occupations deemed suitable. So this is a term we'll come back to. Suitable for apprenticeship training by the state would have 4 years to come into compliance with the effective rule. So item one, timeline is unreasonable. That's basically the takeaway from us. The second thing, and this is absolutely the biggest one with a bullet that I think is representative of the Department of Labor's intent to overreach and to take control of state apprenticeship agencies, is what they're calling a strategic plan requirement. Okay, that sounds, harmless, right? Everybody has to write strategic plans anyway. We do that now. We have strategic plans. The issue with these is the items that are in there. One is the timeline, which we already talked about, but the elements of the plan, the first element is your state apprenticeship laws. That's fine. We had to show that to become a state apprenticeship agency. We had to show that we didn't have any laws at the state level that conflicted with the federal implementation. We don't currently, and that's not a big deal, so that's not too worried about that one. But this section here with strategic elements is very concerning because it's completely subjective. So you could have, for example, oops, I changed slides. You could have, for example, the goals for expansion. If we say that we intend to expand in manufacturing and healthcare and architecture and construction and IT, whatever, and we're going to take an industry sector driven focus on those things. If the current administration who is judging our plan says, no, we want you to focus instead on not industry sector, but different types of people. So we want the goals for expansion to be written based on veterans and people with disabilities and females and minorities and like that. They could tell us how we have to set our goals as a state. This is not tied to them giving us money. So don't confuse this with, if we take a federal grant, they get to tell us how we have to spend it. We understand that, and which is why we very rarely, in my office, we currently have no federal grant money that we accept, because we don't want to let them tell us how we have to do our job, and we don't need their money to do our jobs. But those kinds of things are completely subjective. So the issue at hand is we could be told, and our SAA status could be held hostage to whatever the political whims are of the particular executive agency that's in charge at that moment. Now, if we're under the current administration, they're going to have specific focuses and they're going to want to see growth in certain areas. If we were to change to a different administration, they're going to have completely different priorities. Apprenticeship has never been a political football and does not need to become one. And this sets it up so that it very much could become a political football. Whoever's in charge could start trying to drive the state agencies by approving or not approving our strategic plans if we line up with or don't line up with what they want to see done. So I put a couple of pending questions here, but that's kind of how does the deadline align with the state's legislative session? And then also, and I think this one is pretty telling, they're requiring every state that is run in these proposed rules, they would require every state that is run by a state agency to submit this detailed plan with all these goals and objectives and da-da-da-da-da. There's no mention of the other 18 states, I got to do math. The other 18 states that they run, they would not be putting out the same information. They would not be creating their own strategic plans. They would not be publishing their performance data. They would not be publishing what their goals were or their targets, any of that kind of stuff. So we would be held to a completely different and higher and arbitrary standard than the ones that they operate. That seems ridiculous. What's good for the goose should be good for the gander. If you're gonna make us do it, then you ought to be doing it too. The next one here honestly has a limited impact on our state, but it does represent, again, federal overreach. So we have an advisory council. That's the way we were set up with the Alabama Apprenticeship Advisory Council. We don't have a regulatory council, but there are states where they have regulatory councils. For example, Washington State, they've got a bazillion apprentices in Washington State. They've been doing it forever. They have a regulatory council. And what that means is when a new program is proposed, instead of it just being the agency that reviews it and decides if this is a quality program, or if this meets the needs of industry or whatever, it goes before an industry council and that industry council decides. Well, the federal rules being proposed would obliterate that. And there are quite a few states that have that. So on a national scale, this would mean significant upheaval in other states. This is not particularly critical to us because we don't operate that way, but it would be a significant change on the national scale. This one is particularly critical to us, and maybe one of the biggest ones that I think people that are operating apprenticeships in Alabama would object to. So we're big on the competency model. If y'all have heard us talk, you've always heard us talk about the competency model. The apprentice will be able to observable action verb, right? That's how we judge the things they do on the job. That lets the employer very specifically define what you've got to be able to do to be good at this job. Well, in the current rules, they're essentially getting rid of the competency-based apprenticeship approach and converting everything to what they've called it a unitary approach. They didn't say that in the rules, but they said that in one of their webinars where they're explaining. They called it a unitary approach. And they would require a minimum of 2,000 hours of on-the-job learning for every apprenticeship to be tracked no matter what. So you would now have to track both the competencies and the time. One, that's additionally burdensome for employers because they're the ones that track this because the learning is being done on the job. So that's additionally burdensome for employers when they said, no, we want to be able to judge, can this person do this thing? Yes or no. When they can, we check it off and they move ahead to the next item. No matter whether that takes 6 weeks or 6 months, that's how they want to judge that person's performance. They're now being told, no, you also have to consider how long they're doing it. One of the big, nationally, the fastest growing apprenticeship is teacher apprenticeship. Y'all know we're working on that. We've got high school and elementary teacher apprenticeships ready to roll out this upcoming school year. This would kill a lot of the models of teacher apprenticeship. If you think about it, there are some one-year models for teacher apprenticeship, competency-based. So let's say I've got a degree in biology or math or history or whatever, and I want to go become a teacher. We're looking at setting up a model for a one-year competency-based apprenticeship where that person learns the skills of being a teacher to add on to content knowledge they already have. Well, if you have a 2,000-hour requirement, y'all probably know teachers typically work 182, 185 days in a school year. So that's not 2,000 hours of work. And then even if you work a summer school schedule, that's normally 4 weeks, 4 hours a day for 4 days a week during the summer. So another 64 hours. So just as an example, having a flat 2,000-hour requirement would kill programs that are strictly competency-based and would have a major impact on programs that are 1 year long competency-based programs. We're opposed to that for a couple of reasons. Main is because it restricts our flexibility to design the program the way the employer wants it, but also because it adds burden for the employer. Even if they say, fine, we'll track the hours, now we're just having to keep up with more stuff that they said from the outset was not the way they wanted to judge the program. It's a one-size-fits-all approach, and it just doesn't make sense for the state of Alabama. The next one is endpoint assessments. Endpoint assessments are exactly what they sound like. They're final exams on the end of every apprenticeship program. These are done in Germany. They're done in the UK. They're common in some other European programs. And the idea is, take the German model, for example. In the German model, you've got local chambers of commerce and a national German chamber of commerce, and they essentially are the ones that oversee quality control of registered apprenticeship for the entire country, for Germany. So they have developed models of, if you want to be a chemist or an electrician or a doctor or whatever, then there's a German Chamber of Commerce approved model for what that looks like and an approved endpoint exam. That works there because that essentially every employer in that country has confidence in the German chamber to be the voice of industry and to listen, because it's driven by regional councils, to actually write exams that make sense and fit the needs of the employer and really do demonstrate whether that person is ready to take on the job full time or not. We don't have such an agency in the U.S. So would we trust the U.S. Department of Labor to create final exams to tell us whether a person was qualified as a nurse or an electrician or a teacher or whatever? I compare this back to, for those of you in the K-12 world, graduation exams. Almost every state has moved away from graduation exams because it never worked out. Having one uniform cookie cutter test at the end, you saw people that were disadvantaged that didn't perform as well, although they might have had just as good or better grades. They weren't performing on the exam. This is a bad idea overall. In the UK, an entire cottage industry came up of third-party test providers who wrote and promoted exams, and you had to use one of the, still currently have to use one of the approved exams from one of these third-party test providers. That adds cost for the employer. They've got to now go out and pay some third-party test provider to give this exam to their employee, who they should be deciding whether that person's competent or not. We always say the employer votes with their checkbook. They're not going to just complete somebody because they feel like it. They're not going to just graduate them out of the apprenticeship program because they've been in here a while, because it's their employee. They're the one invested in it. Why would they put somebody out of the program and say they were competent if they weren't? So this just is another example of taking away the ownership of the apprenticeship progress and quality from the employer. So we are opposed to that. Suitability determinations. This is a major, major flexibility that we gained when we became a state apprenticeship agency that would go away. So suitability just means when we look at an occupation, we determine, is this something that can be trained and should be trained by an apprenticeship? For example, Hyundai Power Transformers right here in Montgomery. They are one of the only companies in the world that does that thing, that makes those power transformers. Under this proposal, only the U.S. Department of Labor administrator would be able to decide whether that occupation is suitable for apprenticeship. And part of the application is you've got to go get, right now, 8 other industry people who do that job to say, yes, that's a good training model. There might not be, I'm not exaggerating, there might not be 8 other companies on the planet who do that. Now, why should we have to go and try to get approval from somebody else when Hyundai Power Transformer says, no, we're the subject matter experts, this is the training we want? Well, currently, we have the ability as a state apprenticeship agency to create state-recognized models. The only difference is I can't guarantee that credential at the end of it will be recognized if you were to go to work in Georgia or Florida or something like that. I can't guarantee that. But they're not going to work in Georgia or Florida or something like that because there's nobody doing that job. So that portability is not critically important. So we can build that state model. We've got other examples of that. I know some of you are in construction industry. There is no national model that is specifically for horizontal construction, road building stuff. There's no national model for that. We built one for a company in Alabama that is specifically about road building and the road building equipment and the paving and grading operations. That would go away if this goes into effect. The U.S. Department of Labor would have full authority to say, yes, that's a job, or no, it's not a job. So that's suitability determinations. CTE apprenticeships, they were trying, I got to give them credit, they were making an effort at having a good national definition of youth apprenticeships. They just did a bad job of it. So they came up with the idea of what they called a CTE apprenticeship. You can see some of the characteristics. You got to be 16. It includes 900 paid hours of on-the-job learning, 540 hours of instruction. Okay, that's fine. This is a pretty egregious, ridiculous inclusion here, though. At least 12 post-secondary credit hours. That's 4 college classes. No matter what you're studying, you got to have 4 college classes. So if you want to be a road builder or an electrician or anything else, there are a lot of jobs, and we've been saying it for years, not everybody needs to go to college. Apprenticeships are post-secondary education. They've hijacked the word post-secondary and trained it to mean college. So in this case, they're requiring everybody to get college credits, and they are also then based on what they're calling industry skills frameworks, once again, established and approved by the USDOL, not by local industry in the state. So those are our 2 biggest objections. The saving grace on this one is states are not required to even participate in these CTE apprenticeships. So if it came out looking just like this, we just wouldn't do it. We would just continue with our own youth apprenticeship model, which is far superior to this anyway. So that was a swing and a miss. I mean, they were trying, but it just wasn't a good idea. This 75% wage rule is, again, indicative of the federal overreach that is being proposed here. This would say that every apprentice, when they complete the program, must be making at least 75% of the journeyman rate when they complete. Our apprentices make more than that anyway when they complete their programs. Typically, we never have anybody that's at less than 75%. The question really is, though, 1, why 75? Why not 78? Why not 72? Why not 60? Who came up with 75? It's arbitrary and capricious. They just threw a number down on paper because it sounded good. And then the second part of that question is, who determines what the journey worker rate is? Currently, the employer, the individual employer, when they're building the program, they tell us, this is the journey worker rate. This is what we pay a fully skilled person in this job. But there's no definition and no characteristics to set that. What I'm concerned about is that the feds will then come in and establish, using the prevailing wage, Alan, y'all know prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon rules, that they would use prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon rules to specify what the journey worker rate is. And now we're out here telling employers specifically what they need to pay. We have never been in that business. We always coach employers on, hey, you got to be competitive. You know, this is what they're paying at Buc-ee's, so you got to be realistic. But we don't tell employers what they have to pay. This would put us in a different boat. Prohibition of non-compete clauses. I know, Peggy, this in healthcare, this is a big thing. They would be specifically prohibiting non-compete clauses. Okay, we don't do non-compete clauses in apprenticeship now in Alabama, but we do work commitments. So for example, if I put you through a 2-year apprenticeship to become a nurse or a medical lab tech or whatever, it's currently fair for me to say, hey, I want you to work for me for 2 years on the other end of that, so I get a return on my investment. Right now, that's permissible, and it is unclear in the current rules if that would be permissible or not. A straight up non-compete clause, no question you couldn't do it under the current rule, under the proposed rules. And I'm not too worried about that because we don't really have those. But those work commitments we definitely do have, especially in healthcare, and it seems that they would be getting rid of those, and I think that's an unfair treatment of employers to not have that option. This is a thing, 5-year cycle for program reviews. I'm not going to waste your time on that. Basically, they want us to go review every program every 5 years. When we took over from them, there were programs that hadn't been reviewed in 25 years, and that is not hyperbole. So they expect us to do it every 5, but they had not done it in a quarter century. This is another one, proof of financial capacity to sustain. When you come to me as an employer and say, I want to have an apprenticeship program, you have to prove to me through some undefined process that you as an employer have the financial capacity to run that program over the long term. I'm not a CPA. I don't have a crystal ball. If you're a brand new company in Alabama, which we have a lot of, you might need an apprenticeship program just to survive. But what am I supposed to say? Hey, brand new IT company we recruited, or brand new biotech firm we recruited, I'm supposed to tell you because you don't have a proven track record, you can't have an apprenticeship based on my judgment call? It's ridiculous. It's a level of involvement that we should not have in the employer's process. Continuity of employment, we don't use. Completion rate calculations, don't worry about it. Okay, so here's the hot list. So just as a refresher, these are some that you might want to comment on. And I will send this recording out, and we'll also send the PowerPoint so you can refer back to it. As you think through these things, and if you want to go look at the full NPRM, you're welcome to, but it's 779 pages. Go through that and think through these and think about how this would impact your business or the businesses that are in your industry. Once you have done that, these are the next steps. There are 40 days left in the public comment period. All right. You can scan that thing, or you can put in that, click that link right there once I send you the PowerPoint, which I'll do immediately after this. And it will take you to a page that looks like this, where you will put in your public comment. You can comment anonymously, or you can comment and attach your name and all to it. You can type as much, or it's 5,000 character limit. You do not need to write an essay here. Pick items that you feel strongly one way or the other about, and put in straightforward, concise comments. They're going to get read more clearly, and they're going to be more impactful than if you try to get too deep into the weeds. Some folks have already asked me, hey, can you give us samples? Can you give us draft language? Can you tell us, what to put in here, and we'll change it out and put our name on it? There is a commenter's checklist right here, and one of the things that they have made clear from the beginning is if it looks like cookie cutter language, it will be deleted. So I'm not doing that. I'm not not deleted, ignored. So because I know how it is. You guys are busy. If I sent y'all all a thing and said, here's our comments on it, then every one of you would change it, put your name on it, and submit it. That won't do us any good. So I'm not doing that. But it's pretty straightforward, real quick process. You can put as much or as little as you want in there. You tell them you're not a robot, and then off to the races. All right, so that's all the time that I begged you for today. I have as much time as you want. If anybody has questions, I'm glad to try to answer them.
Josh, this is Peggy. Thank you very much. Is there a way for, not cookie cutter, but give us an email that we can expound upon? I know that I guess it was the last slide you showed us. We can expound upon those. Yes,
and you'll have the whole slide deck, so that it's got included in there kind of the questions that we were concerned about, the items of concern. So you can see some of that language, I hope, in there. But if you start to write it, or you're like, nah, what did you say about this, or it doesn't make any sense, shoot me an email. I'll shoot you something back.
All right.
And we've got 40 days to do it. But that sounds longer than it is, so we don't put it off. Trace, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on what Peggy was asking, do you have perhaps specific issues or industry-specific issues that you would like for us to specifically talk about? From a construction industry standpoint, you had the bullet points with the hot topics. Are there hot topics specific to the construction industry that we should touch on?
Yeah, there's some of these I think that you would be more concerned in construction about. For example, the 75% wage rule. If you currently use union labor, for example, now you've got a CBA to deal with, you've got Davis-Bacon rules, you got minimum wage laws, you got prevailing wage, and then we'd be adding another wage law that you'd have to deal with. So that's, in construction world, that's kind of common. So you would have a whole lot of that. So if I was in your chair as a construction person, I'd be very concerned about that one. And then also I'd be concerned about the one about the state apprenticeship agency being able to create occupations customized to your needs. So the U.S. Department of Labor, for example, does not recognize anything to do with solar installation. Well, solar panel installation is becoming more and more and more common. They want that to always be done, every part of it, only by either an iron worker or a journeyman electrician. They don't want anybody else doing it. But there's a lot of stuff that is laborer work. And so we want to be able to set up craft laborer occupations that are doing just the mechanical install, right? And the basics of this stuff. If you are in construction, also, you're probably familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. All of this plays into the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, where they're requiring 15% of the total labor to be done by apprentices. There's not that many apprentices in the state of Alabama. There's not that many apprentices in the country to do all of that work, 15% of it to be done by apprentices. I would love for us to have that many, but that's not realistic. So those are some that I would think specifically to construction, but everybody, no matter what your industry is, ought to be concerned about you having to prove to my office that you have the financial capacity to sustain your business. That's none of my business. I don't want to see that. I shouldn't be involved in that level of your operation, and neither should the feds.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very helpful. The second thing that I was going to ask is, you mentioned that you would be sending out this PowerPoint afterwards, but I think you said at the start that the webinar itself was being recorded, and you've touched on a lot of things outside of just the bullet points and what's on the slides. Are you also going to distribute the recording of this webinar?
I will, and what I'll have to do to make sure everybody can easily access it is I will download it from our server. I will upload it to YouTube, and I'll send you a YouTube link so that nobody has any problems with, logging into anything to view it or anything like that. So it'll be publicly accessible on YouTube.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, so this is more, it seems to me like a government overreach program. For instance, the post office is a government-run program, and you see what kind of problems they've got. The student loans were working okay until 2009 because it was privatized. But then under Obama, he decided in his wisdom that it would be better run by the federal government. This is the same thing, right?
Yes, sir. That's a very apt explanation. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? This is my top priority for the next 40 days. So as much time as you need or any questions you have, send them to me. This is, waking me up at 3 a.m. thinking about it. So I promise you, if you need any extra language, extra explanation, anything like that, hit me up and I'll be glad to give you anything you need for you to help us. I want to help you help us. No matter how this goes, we're going to be glad that we have a state apprenticeship agency on the other end, because at least we will have a buffer that we can serve to prevent some of the most egregious impacts of this, where other states won't. So we're still better off with a state apprenticeship agency than if we didn't have one, but it's going to make my job tougher. My job is to make apprenticeship work for the employers and the people of the state of Alabama. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay. Well, if anybody else, yes, sir. Anybody else has any other questions or anything, you hopefully know how to reach me. If you don't, my contact information, you write it down, 706-326-1324. That's my phone number. But you all probably know how to find me. Okay. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, sir.